Samantha awoke to the sound of gently chiming bells echoing throughout the residential complex 19. It was a sound that she had heard at 6 a.m. every day of her 33 years, an auditory alarm that heralded the start of yet another regimented day in her life on Unity Entity 1. She sat up, knowing it was best not to linger in the comfortable warmth of her bed past the alarm. A not-so-small part of her longed to remain in its comforting embrace, but for a little while longer. It was a mental battle she fought every first day of the weekly work cycle, but she took solace in the fact that she was far from alone in her longing. It was something of a social norm that first day of the week was the most challenging to get motivated. Fortunately, the Unity AI seemed to acknowledge this particular human social norm, scheduling work to start 30 minutes later than on other days. Today was different, however. Both Samantha and her partner Jason had recently received promotions which came with a new apartment. It was more spacious, of course, with 2 full bedrooms and 2 family living area. But it was the fact it was fitted out with a small automated kitchenette that most excited Samantha, and as she stood, she could already hear the pre-programmed breakfast meal being prepared. The smell of the cooking food, mixed with the rich aroma of hot caffeine drink, wafted throughout the small apartment. Her stomach growled at the prospect of fried protein strips and hashed carbo block cakes. And even more exciting was the time it saved her, as she no longer had to battle to get her kids ready early to eat breakfast in the communal dining hall anymore. Noticing neither of her small children had yet stirred, she grabbed at her now standing husband and dragged him eagerly to their small steam shower. Stealing 10 minutes of private intimacy together before the start of the day felt amazing, the steam mixing with Jason's hands to caress and soothe her skin and awaken her body, with sweet kisses reaffirming their bond. The Unity AI encouraged such partner bonding, claiming that it strengthened parenting units and enhanced worker productivity. All Samantha knew was that those 10 minutes were some of her favorite of the day. It made her feel closer to Jason as her registered partner and the father of her 2 children. Life was wonderful in that moment, she thought to herself, with career success and robust familial bonds, affording her a reserved jubilance that she had never before experienced. She knew many were not as fortunate as her, but it was not for her to question Unity and its plan for each of them. She was simply thankful to have been so blessed. Samantha was drawn from her reverie by the sounds of her children, boys aged 9 and 11. Both were now awake, having donned their gray and white jumpsuits that classified them as non-economic juveniles and mandatory education participants. As she and Jason had dressed, she found the boys sitting at the 4-seat dining table, chatting and laughing with each other, as the ceiling-mounted robotic arms fluidly glided across the roof to fetch and place the cooked breakfast and fruit juice analog drinks before them. They ate and chatted about their impending days of work and learning. Jason was a power plant regulator, while Samantha was an exo-womb technologist. Their jobs were meaningful and productivity and contributed greatly to the prosperity of Unity and all people floating in the clouds of Altura. The doorbell chimed and the door slid open automatically to reveal a humanoid configuration robot construct over 8 foot tall with an anthropomorphized body. It was a mobcon, this one designated to escort the children to their educational lessons. Samantha and Jason did not question handing over their children to the custody of the construct, they themselves having both been subject to such an upbringing. She understood from Unity's broadcast that there were places in the galaxy where people did not even receive an education or even had consistent and nutritious food supplies. Yes, those wretches could go anywhere and do anything they wanted, but such liberty was an illusion in the face of overwhelming deprivation and a lack of purpose. No, Samantha thought. This was better, more productive, safe, and secure for herself and those she loved. With the kids off to school, and their friends and their mobcon custodian, Samantha gathered her own carry bag and left the apartment to head to work, her husband Jason in tow. She exited the apartment into a long, white, illuminated metallic hallway, at least 5 meters in height and width. There were thousands of doors exactly like her own lining the walls of the hall and a myriad of similar hallways in residential complex 17. She turned and kissed her husband briefly, a momentary lapse in public propriety. Public displays of affection were generally discouraged, as were all forms of emotional exhibitions. A construct turned to witness her peck on her husband's cheek, his metallic face and round red glowing eyes lingering on Samantha for a moment. She waved to the construct apologetically, and it soon turned away from her and continued down the corridor with his charges. It was a silly mistake, Samantha chastised herself. A hangover from the enjoyable intimacy she had shared with Jason this morning. She was, after all, only human. Chastened by her act, she smiled at Jason and wordlessly turned and joined a group of commuters walking to the Vacrel station that serviced the complex, with Jason walking in the opposite direction. The walkway in the center of the corridor moved like a travelator, yet, instead of being mechanical, it was comprised of an adjustable dimension metallic substance that flowed horizontally like a liquid, yet maintained the attributes of a solid vertically. Samantha had no idea how it worked, but having grown up in Unity Entity 1, she did not question the miraculous technologies around her. She was escorted to the end of the corridor, following her fellow residents in a regimented line, all of whom walked quietly. It was only a matter of minutes until she reached a bank of ant-grab elevators that rapidly descended down several hundred stories to the base of the city and to the Vacrel station. Here, Samantha joined thousands of others who were allotted this work shift and made her way through the crowd in a brisk, orderly fashion towards VAC train number 1DC3. The rail station was an expansive space, the ceiling extending well over 40 meters high with countless platforms spread out over several hectares. As she walked, she glanced to the side for a moment, her attention drawn by a seemingly violent scuffle between two men. She was shocked in disbelief at such an overtly chaotic display, the very concept seeming so foreign to her mind as if to be alien itself. She stared, along with a dozen other spectators, as the two men tussled and wrestled with one another, several people trying to break them up to no avail. It was only when half a dozen mobcons, a collection of rhino, hunters, and spider configurations, approached to intervene, did the men stop. Samantha was confused when she saw the men abruptly pause their aggression against one another and turn to the approaching mobcons almost in choreographed unison. She thought how strange it was that the men did not run, how they seemed to stand tall when facing their impending capture, interrogation, and strenuous re-education. Perhaps they had accepted their fate, she thought. Samantha was right, of course. They had accepted their fate, but not in the way that she understood. "Here's what we think of your tyranny, Unity," one of the men declared before reaching into his pocket and squeezing something unseen. The explosion from the men detonating their best homemade explosives rang out through the cavernous hall of the Vactran station with deafening force. All around the area, for several hundred meters, people collapsed in panic, covering their ears instinctually at the thunderous clap of fiery destruction. The very ground of the platform area shook with violent tremors, and the several pylons that held up the ceiling bowed and buckled from the strain. Samantha did not witness any of this. She had been standing too close to the explosion when it was set off. Her death had been nearly instantaneous, as it had been for more than 100 others. Her limbs had been blown from her body by the force of the explosion. Her ribcage crushed and her neck snapped in violent whiplash. As she fell to the ground, her lifeless husk was charred from the ensuing fireball, utterly incinerating her. That night, when Jason returned home, having collected his two sons, they were met by a small red laminated card attached to the door. Jason dropped to his knees upon seeing the card, not caring who saw his openly apologetic display of grief. He hugged the children, who began to cry uncontrollably with their father. The card message was simple, informing Jason of the death of his partner. Yet it was the last two words from Unity's message that stuck with Jason and would gnaw at his mind, his heart, and his soul for the rest of his life. A message, an instruction that he would never be able to accept. A seemingly belittling comment that cast the death of his soulmate as if it were a momentary inconvenience. Simply read, "Carry on."